Hello and welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, for the first and only time in Grody and Unprofessional history, we will speak positively of old Neutron Jack. In addition, we discuss career poker strategies and proper talent tapping techniques. Jim Weber, welcome back to the Grody and Unprofessional studio. It is so good to have you here. You are an Octavia Rocket graduate, and all of our Octavia fans are glad to have their pride and joy, Jim Weber, in studio. They've been begging for 6 months to get you back in here, so here you are.
So you got the call?
I did, yeah. It actually came in as a telegram. I converted it, and then I got the call. Yep.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good, because I think they're having a reunion in a couple of weeks, and they're still trying to track me down, but I'm hiding.
Okay, well, we won't tell them geographically where we are. We're in a bunker having this conversation somewhere in middle America.
Sure. You know, one thing I did want to bring up, have you looked into, considered a NIL for me?
A NIL?
Yeah, name, image, and likeness like they have in sports.
For sure.
Because over on Brush and Floss Daily, the podcast, they've offered me a free month supply of dental floss. So I was wondering what you might have in offer for me.
So the hard part about Grody and Unprofessional is it's actually also Grody and Unprofitable.
Ooh.
If you want in on the ownership structure, we would love to have you help fund this little exercise that we've got going here. So we'll make that offer offline. But I'll also consider NIL, not name, image, and likeness, but the mathematical NIL. That's what we're figuring you're worth in this conversation.
I figured that was what was coming here. I may have to go over and talk to the people at Brush and Floss Daily and see podcasts to see what they got for
Your
me.
teeth are beautiful, by the way. I can see why.
They did. I thought they did a wonderful job myself.
I can see why you're the face of Brush and Floss Daily. All right, in all seriousness, not really.
Really?
The purpose for us sitting here is to continue to talk about innovation and innovative organizations. We've spent some time talking about and circling around on what is innovation, and we're going to continue that conversation and get into different aspects of what are the type of people that you bring into an innovative organization. How do you curate innovation? How do you protect it from dying a death of administration, and on and on and on. So we're going to take a little bit different approach this time. You're going to ask the questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Finally took over.
That's right. It only took you a few episodes, but you've completely commandeered this exercise, and now we're going to do it your way. That's fine.
This is typical Jim. There's no question. I think everybody's going, oh yeah, that's Jim. He's taken over.
I was forewarned.
So I was particularly interested in a comment that you had sent me in our back and forth on this, and you came up with what I considered the best description of an innovative or an organization that needs to be developed going forward if you're going to exist in this world. And I'm going to quote you here.
Oh boy.
My goal and my passion was to be the one setting the cultural thermostat differently than the rest of the company, so that my group was in a gaseous state which allowed movement and fluidity, parentheses, while still doing work, but the rest of the company was solid structure, stacking the present onto the past. Now, I happen to think that was the best description of how a company should be, especially in this world where there are tsunamis.
Yeah.
And what's a tsunami? Tsunami is those things that come just basically, you don't see them coming, and we all have them in our lives, and you're going like, didn't see that one coming. When you have something the way you describe it here, it seems like you've created at least some degree of protection in this whole thing. So,
Right.
So the question I would ask you is, how did you make up such a framework?
Yeah. To give credit where credit is definitely due, the beginnings of this framework started with the book Loonshots, which is a book written by Safi Bahcall, and he goes back to guys at Kodak. He goes back to guys coming out of World War II that started what does it look like to be research, not research for the sake of generically advancing society, but research for the purpose of creating a product, for the purpose of commercialization. And we've talked about one measure of innovation is, did it do something for someone, whether societally or financially in a business context? Well, I have a thermodynamics background, so I'm going to go a little bit into that space, but this is where it spoke to me. He talks about the triple point of water. There's one temperature and one pressure where water can exist in all three phases. And if you've already been lost in the analogy, just zone out for about 90 seconds and rejoin us. It'll be great. Tiny changes in temperature or pressure get off of that triple point, and all of the molecules of water in that environment will move to a single phase. So you go up in temperature, you're going to move to the liquid or gaseous phase. Now, I think this is where I start to add my layers to it. I think that's really where Sashi took it. The concept for me is that you can have multiple phases of an organization simultaneously. So you have to have the phalanx, the process-based Marines that are going to punch and everything is in line and everything's working. And that's how you continue to push the line and optimize. But you also have to have forward scouts that are out in front. They may only have a pistol and they may only have one grenade. They're not going to take on the entire army of the competition or even a given technology, but they're going to push the envelope and they're going to report back. Whether you go to David Sterling with the SAS, there's multiple military examples where the outcasts, the machine wanted to just consume them. David Sterling of the SAS, he's going against 200 years of successful British military experience. They owned the seas and they owned everything. And in World War II, he says, we're going to do it differently. Give me 40 guys. We're going to live 100 miles behind the lines, behind their lines, but out in the desert and on and on and on. And so it's this concept of owning an organization that is ambidextrous. You have to have some people that are motivated, stimulated, and benefited by doing what we've always done just a little bit better. And you have to have another organization that is motivated, stimulated, and benefited by breaking everything and seeing if putting it together in a different direction or a different way is beneficial. And the thermostat analogy for me was helpful because it meant it's all the same molecule. And we're going to get into it. Not every engineer should be in every organization. I don't want to go to that. Not every molecule is interchangeable. But I needed the flexibility to have a little bit different HR policy, and a little bit different IT policy, and a little bit different lawyer who was willing to take a little more risk, and a little bit different comp and ben structure, and a little bit different review structure. I'm not throwing it all out. I'm not starting from scratch, but I'm a half a degree off.
Interesting.
And large, bureaucratic, established companies, they can't handle a half a degree off, because it's not global and it's not synergistic and it's not scalable and we have to keep track of it and on and on and on. And so my entire life was spent trying to find, how do I adjust the thermostat in HR benefits, in comp and ben, in the legal environment, in IT environment, just a half a degree off so that we can get a complete phase shift in innovation and creativity.
Fascinating. Now, how did you do that?
The first way that you solve a problem is to identify that the problem exists. For me, that was a watershed event. The simple act of declaring that my goal was to find how far off of the norm do we have to be. As an engineer, that opens up the toolbox that you're going to use. There are multiple components to that are not available to everyone. I want to admit that very, very freely. We can go to Kelly Johnson's 14 Rules of Management of how he started Skunk Works. When I first read that list of 14 Rules of Management, it was as if seeing the Magna Carta for the first time.
Really?
So much felt became word. So much thought became solidified. It was as if I was looking at the governing equations of creative organizations. And I've spent 7 hours already on this podcast talking about the 14 rules of management.
I've heard some of them.
Correct. Number one, for a reason, is that the executive of Skunk Works must report to the CEO of Lockheed and must be also left alone. There has to be a Pharaoh who knows Joseph and lets Joseph do it his way. And I would say the number one reason, a later question that we're going to get to, is what causes these things to die. The number one reason is there comes a Pharaoh who knows not Joseph.
Yeah.
For me, that's not the direct answer to your question.
No, actually, it was way more. Yeah, it was spot on. I'm sitting here thinking, well, I didn't have that.
And that's why you are way better at this than I was.
No, I don't think so. As you know, I gamed the game a little bit along
Correct.
the way. I think there was a Pharaoh up there, but he was on the other side of this whole process of you need to do it this way. And I still believe in this large organization, in some way we're counting on this loose cannon
Correct.
to be there. In fact, they have more than one loose cannon.
Correct. And they use them.
Yes.
And I'm not going to say abuse them. That's not the word I'm using. I'm reading a book presently called Boyd, B-O-Y-D.
Okay.
And he was an Air Force pilot coming out of Vietnam and into Desert Storm. And he's a loose cannon. But he's a brilliant pilot, one of the best pilots in the U.S., and he has a mechanical engineering degree, and he is brilliant in equations. And he actually creates the mathematical models that you can take any two airplanes, a Piper Cub and a B-52, and you can base them down to their elemental components and say what airspeed, what velocity, and what energy state could the Piper Cub outmaneuver the B-52, and could the B-52. So he can take any two planes and compare them to each other. The first thing he discovers is that the F-111, the brand new plane that we've just spent billions and billions of dollars, cannot beat a MiG at any altitude, at any energy state, or at any velocity. That is an inconvenient truth for every 4- and 5-star general in the Air Force that has been sitting in front of Congress for 10 years saying, the salvation has come and it's a swept wing F-111. Here's the interesting part, and this is where I think your experience overlaps a lot. The 5-star general knows. He vets Boyd, he fights with Boyd, but he goes home at night and he's like, that guy's right. And I am in deep trouble, not just politically, personally, but societally, we're in deep trouble. He positions Boyd in his own organization to say and do things that he can never say and do because he's the head of the pyramid, he's the brand, he's the this, and so he puts Boyd in the Pentagon. The Pentagon is full of full bird colonels, and Boyd is like a major. Yeah. I think. And he's going around the Pentagon with a cigarette in his fingers, and he's poking 3 stars in the chest, burning their tie because he doesn't care. This for me was a very interesting construct. And I'm not saying you're in your career fit perfectly, but Boyd was deployed by 5 stars within their rigid, structured organization that couldn't get out of its own way. He was deployed by them. Not that they could tear the whole thing down and start over, but they could get the pyramid just moved just enough that an F-16 project could come out of an F-111 project.
Sure. Well, I'm not exactly like that guy.
Yeah, you don't smoke.
No. and I never poked.
That's right.
My wit was
your poke.
It was pretty good at that too.
Half the time they didn't know they were getting poked. What was that?
Yeah, I used humor as a weapon. As they walked away, I said, "He didn't."
I think he might have meant that.
So
that is something that you mentored me in, and I am proud to say that I've carried on that skill set to the next generation. Friends of mine listening to the podcast are chuckling right now.
So one person said he uses humor like a weapon.
Yes.
And I was like, well, that's pretty close. I didn't really mean it to be mean, but along the way. In my world, this 5-star general that you're talking about that's up at the top, he kind of went away. Mm. And they changed that whole thing. But to your point, the 1-star and the 2-star generals are the ones who said, okay, this guy maybe has some right thoughts. And in fact, a lot of those people had questions about all the structure themselves. I've often said that I was a remora, and I would attach myself to this large organization or attach myself to this fish or whatever it is, and we wound up in some sort of synergistic way we're able to move forward. My first big gaseous state effort, Turns out that if I told you who the boss was, or described who the boss was, you would be shocked. Here he was. He wore this nice tweed suit in every day, button-down collar, had the nice penny loafers because he wanted to be trendy. He was a county board member and a very conservative individual.
Sure.
He needs all the credit in the world for allowing this gaseous state to exist. Yes. And if anybody would have ever imagined that he would be operating a Silicon Valley type of high-energy group, people will say, well, how'd that happen? Well, for whatever reason, he had a lot of faith in me, and so he immediately decided his job was to be the outward-looking person that just kept everybody back from this whole thing and let this guy do whatever he's doing over there. Remarkable. That guy, I give him all the credit in the world for. Nobody would have seen it. Nobody would have seen that happen.
You touch on a very, very important component of the strategy that we employed as well. The leader of such an enterprise, of a creative enterprise, a gaseous enterprise, as I've studied and looked at companies like Pixar and looked at companies like Skunk Works, there's almost a bilingual leader. And by bilingual, I mean they can put on the powdered wig and they can stand in the king's court and they can speak the king's English and they can tromp and march. The wig doesn't quite fit, but it doesn't stand out. And then they can be out in the highways and byways and rambunctious and running and gunning. Whether it's Ed Catmull at Pixar or whether it's Kelly Johnson or Ben Rich at Skunk Works, as I was early in the phase of joining Precision Planting, you read biographies and you go, man, that guy was an idiot. I don't know how that guy is. And then you read other biographies and you're like, this is who I want to be. And for me, Ed Catmull and Ben Rich were the two that I said they were the boundary layer between creativity and rigidity. They were the curator and the protector of this fluidity. They had to have one leg into the rigidity and one leg into the creativity. What ultimately really, really stressed me out is I was good at the rigidity conversation. I hated it. It sucked the energy out of me. It exhausted me. You come back from a 4-day meeting of global alignment and it's like, I can't get out of bed. This is killing me. But what we did, absolutely what we did, is we looked at who were our boundary layer managers, who were our boundary layer leaders inside of the organization that were 2 parts rigidity and 1 part fluidity, and then we placed them in parts of the organization like OEM solutions. Because OEM solutions is us selling our wild and harebrained ideas to rigid OEMs that are global organizations that have this. So we would put people in that spot that were more rigid in their DNA than fluid, but were sympathetic to the fluidity, and they could take the chaos that was happening behind the curtain. I just envision them standing on the stage with the big velvet curtain behind them, and there's like punching, like the curtain is like flapping and waving and riffling, and he's like, nothing to see here.
That's right.
Everything's under control. It's all part of the show. Literally in recruiting, we would look and say, okay, this is an outward facing, and outward could even mean to our ownership structure, other divisions inside of the ownership structure. This is an outward facing or a boundary role. We aren't looking for a wild man, but we aren't looking for the suit. We have to find somebody who can at least in some portion wear both, because otherwise they're going to hate that this chaos is happening. But guys, it's my name on the line. I can't handle you guys behind the scenes changing everything, but somebody that could stand up with integrity, with honesty, and convey it. There's a friend of mine, he listens to the podcast. His name was the Velvet Hammer.
Ooh,
that's what we called it, because
the velvet fog.
He had the ability to deliver very difficult news with a velvet layer on it, and he was one of the best in our organization at handling behind the curtain chaos, but presenting to our outward facing organizations in a way that they could ingest the information. You can't just have molecules of chaos next to molecules of ice. You're going to end up with a mess. And so we had to be very intentional to create that layer of leadership.
So Larry was this guy you're talking about, but obviously had a different personality in the whole thing. we happened to be one of these outposts. That whole computing area was an outpost nobody cared about. But the higher-ups knew that we needed to have some future-looking stuff.
100%.
So you had to have a computer, right? And there was exempt money, which is not something that I necessarily agree with, but this exempt money was being doled out to them, but under the guise that there had to be a steering committee.
Certainly.
Okay.
I love steering committees.
Steering committee. I only talked to one steering committee in that entire time, only because my boss needed me to go talk to the steering committee.
Yes.
He took care of all that.
100%.
Came back. I've related a story to you where he came back from the big one, calls me in, never called me in on anything, just called me in and says, I just came back from the steering committee. And he's sipping on his coffee. He just really calm, and he's got this nice 8.5 by 11 with every line filled up. And I'm guessing that, he must have gotten some requests now that our program is starting to hit the thing. And as I mentioned to you before, he took it and he looked at me and he keeps on talking, and while he's doing it, he wadded that baby up.
Yes.
He wadded that baby up, and he just kept sipping on his coffee, and he just tossed that baby into the wastebasket and looked at me and said, keep on doing what you're doing.
Amen. That story speaks to my soul.
Oh, it does to me too. It's like, now you have to understand, I was so busy, and we were crushing it, shall we say, and it was already making it. And here's all these people who didn't give a damn what we did. Suddenly, are going to tell you what to do.
Correct.
And he had the good sense to go, well, you've made more progress in 6 months. He actually said that. You've made more progress in 6 months than I've seen in this place ever.
And that person, one of the critical components of that person is that they are confident in who they are. And I'm going to put it probably not the most delicately, they don't desire to be CEO. They're willing to pay the political capital. They need to keep enough chips in their stack to stay at the table, but they're not trying to get to the next table. And I've said over and over again, you get to play poker with a very different strategy if all I'm trying to do is stay at this table versus I need a very different political stack to get to the next table.
That's a good assessment because he was a late bloomer.
100%.
It was kind of like, well, we'll give him this particular position, but he was pretty much figured that was it. And so he'd already seen a lot, taken a lot of this, and they rewarded him with it. And he goes like, I'm comfortable here.
Yes.
But nobody would have ever guessed that relationship would have worked out. That was the most blessed program that anybody could have ever been with.
Yeah.
It was incredible. And he's up there just playing. And nobody knew it was going on. He kept that too.
Hiding in plain sight.
Hiding it in plain sight. And when we did reveal it, it went crazy. And he just quietly sat back and let it go. But it took a while before he finally looked at me and said, we probably need to tell the boss.
You allude to the need for a degree of separation, right? In order to have a gaseous state and a rigid state, there has to be a boundary layer and that degree of separation. One thing, and I think this is probably one of the leading reasons that organizations struggle to maintain two environments, is it doesn't feel fair. You sit in one room and you're pounding on budget and you're pounding on delivery and you're pounding on nickels in your production and seconds, and then you have a meeting and it's like, so and we're going to get into this later, how do you measure innovation? Absolutely, innovation needs to be measured, but it feels unfair. And I use the analogy, oddly enough, this is the second Joseph analogy inside of 20 minutes here.
Cow.
It has a Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat feel to it, where the youngest, because usually it's the smallest, newest group, the youngest brother
into the pit
is like, hey, I had a dream, and what I'm working on is what you're going to work on, and I'm going to do the awesome front end part, and then you get to productionize it. It's going to be great for you. You will be bowing down to me as the head of wheat. And exactly right. The rest of the organization is like, get him out of here. Sell him into slavery. We are not dealing with this dude. I told our organization over and over and over again, you will not act like Joseph. In front of the organization, you will not act like Joseph. You will not tell them that your ideas are better, that what you're working on is more important, this. You will always be helpful. You will always be excited to help them. Now, you got to have kind of T-Rex arms when it comes to the assignment of activities. Like, they kind of can't quite help you, but be extremely accommodating, extremely helpful, because they're coming into every meeting ready to throw you in the pit.
Absolutely. And as I've mentioned to you in some other conversations, there were plenty of people who did not like when you were asked to go tell them how you did something, and you immediately got thrown into the pit. The separation to me is mental, not necessarily physical. In the large organization, they permitted that. You found the right one-star general, and I found 2 of them, actually. I had 2.5. There was another one who was a pretty good guy, too, and I have to admit, didn't see that one coming. But they allowed you to have this mental separation, and no one ever looked at it as if you were special till later on when things started really churning and their life got involved in this.
Right.
And whatever you produced really did impact them. And then there was a little discomfort in this thing. And there was a little bit of what you talk about is the envy and then we'll get to the awards type thing, where that really comes out big time. But to me, the separation, in your mind, you'd say, gee, I'd love to be out there in that cool building over there and away from everybody. I mean, even I was like, oh, man, that would be the coolest thing in the world. But in reality, it would probably be a kind of a bad thing if you're not careful
Sure.
what you do it. If you can do it right, good for you. I'll raise my hand and say, great, do it. But I didn't have that privilege, but I did have the privilege of working with a couple of bosses who basically allowed us together as a team to create that independent world.
Yeah. Pixar has the benefit of geography. Skunk Works did actually build a building on the other side of the parking lot.
They did.
Bell Labs had a little bit of the benefit of geography. We also had the benefit of geography. We were in Tremont, Illinois, which was away from the rest of it. And I want to give all the credit where credit is due. You lived at the hub of the machine. You lived in the capital city of the kingdom, and were able to, with all the politicians, able to maneuver through that. Again, I had the luxury of being out in Durango somewhere. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody was aspiring to move to my facility to advance their career, which was very helpful from the perspective of, if you put your base in a place nobody wants to go, you don't have to say you're not welcome. They just choose not to come.
Well, I'm a bit envious. I have a lot of scars and bruises, and I did talk really fast, and a good thing I had a quick wit to be able to get through this thing. But on the other hand, there's some really handy things, and I think you alluded to it. The resources that they had and the smart people that were there were very handy to have around. This is the question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to be able to work right into it here while I put my glasses on so I can actually read the darn thing. Did you use the present workers, or did you have to hire people? Now, I'll let you go first, but I'm going to...
Please, I'll let you lead on this one. You lead on this one.
In this particular case, I was very fortunate. What extraordinary talent that the company would hire. But it wasn't always well tapped.
Sure.
And I was a tapper. And I was like, wow, I need a computer. Oh, they got a computer. I need a couple of there's some smart guys over there. They're doing something that is not going to get us to the moon, to the moonshot type thing. And I did have the opportunity to hire some people directly. Sometimes they were agency workers. Sometimes they were people from other departments. Sometimes I inherited them. But what was great was, for the most part, they were talented but untapped. Correct. And that was my job, was to tap this and go like, wow, these guys are a lot smarter. They're a lot more innovative. And they always were smart, but a lot more innovative. After all, most of the people they hired were college graduate engineering from the big major universities, or even some of the smaller universities in the Midwest here. And most of them were farm kids at that time.
Yeah.
We need to talk about that too.
Yeah.
You hired a lot of farm kids. We hired a lot of farm kids. Now they don't hire so many farm kids.
No.
That company was built on
by
hiring farm kids.
Correct.
And now it's moving into another, and I understand it. Things morph. There are not as many farm kids there used to be.
Yeah.
With all the introduction of lots of electronics and lots of that stuff like that. They looking other places for it now. But for a period of time, that's the way it was. Anyway, so tapping was part of my...
I don't know a ton about tapping maple syrup out of trees, but I get the impression that before you tap it, you knock on it to see what's going on. And I would say I experienced, not only did you tap, but you were a social butterfly knocking on a lot of trees to find where tapping was most likely to be profitable. I remember that.
Maybe I was a hunter, but I have to admit that the first big program that I think it's still in use to this day really has made a major impact. The two guys that I totally credit, along with myself, of making this happen were both picked by me.
Yeah.
And the one, he had this program, I had this idea, and was like, whoa. And it immediately connected. He had entirely different personalities, but amazing connection. And then the other one was a college graduate trainee working for me. And as soon as he got done, I turned to the boss. I said, I want that guy. So choosing and finding, in this case, they were right in front of me, which was great. I've mentioned stories to you before where it was remarkable. I would come up with all these ideas. I talked to one, talked to the other one, and 3 days later, they'd come down and say the famous words, Jim, you got a minute?
Right.
I go down there, and they would show me what they did, and then all the time, I know I'm repeating myself, it says a great idea, Jim, and I go like, oh, this is way better than anything I ever thought of entire life. And that's what I mean by tapping.
Yeah.
It was remarkable, the resources that were sitting right in front of all of us.
Right.
Incredible. So why would a guy walk away from, so why would you work in a big company? I was like, well, I had everything I could possibly want.
Right.
And I could go home at 5:30.
Right. Exactly. A couple things come to mind. First, as you're telling the story of utilizing the computer, and computer resources were scarce as you were working on this program 40 years ago, John Boyd, the Air Force guy, he was court-martialed for stealing about $2 million of computer time to work on his project.
Oh, no.
And he actually passed the court-martial, or was not ultimately court-martialed, because he was right, because all of the work he had done. And so covert operations for access to computers is a big part of innovation through the 1970s and 80s. And I think even Bill Gates' story is him hacking into the University of Washington computer that his dad was a professor at, and programming is like a 12-year-old or something like that. So a little covert action is a big part of innovation.
I will confess, but only off mic, there was an incident, and it was all good. It was all for the better, and we demonstrated to the world that this was the way to do it. But we had to go to some chicanery to pull this one off. And I'm not saying I'm proud of having done that. And I do have my hands still break out in cold sweat when I think about it. But we got by with it, and not only did we get by with it, it was to the benefit of the larger organization. And I know my bosses would say, hey, way to go, guy. Every one of them would say that. But I'm not admitting to anything specific.
No. And I think the statute of limitations on internal charge numbers has long since.
I don't know about that. So when you hired people,
yeah,
what did you do?
So I'm going to be funny here to start. I tapped the same people you did.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I never got a call.
I know.
Wait a minute. Let me check my phone number. Maybe you left a message.
That's right.
No, I don't think so.
Our target audience was engineers that had worked at the big company for 3 to 5 years.
And couldn't take it any longer, huh?
And had not been tapped.
Yeah.
Had been left to sit in the forest and do what everybody else did. Our recruiting strategy was named the black sheep of the blue chips.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We went targeting the 3 to 5 year engineer that had been taught a brilliant background in product development.
Yeah.
They had seen what validation plans look like. They had seen what concepting looked like. They had seen what world-class purchasing looked like. They had seen this, and this. And they were furious that in the 400-meter relay, they were handed the baton for a quarter meter.
Yeah.
And then had to hand it off to somebody else. And they said, I went into engineering because I wanted to do engineering. I didn't want to manage a spreadsheet for a guy to work on it in Chennai. That was said 100 times inside of interviews. And so, honestly, we joked over and over and over again that Caterpillar was our greatest supplier. We got all of our best people from there.
Very talented people.
Correct.
And I've already admitted. And it was like, wow. This is like, I could just pick over here, I could pick over there. But you did what I did, which is you looked. You watched.
Correct.
Watched them in their behavior. I looked for people who were, I can't say inventive, but were enthusiastic.
Correct.
So dial ahead here. You and I actually crossed together on a project.
Yes, we did.
We did. And I'm going to jump down to my question down here. I said,
I didn't even get to finish that one.
No,
but keep going.
We'll jump back.
Yeah, good.
I said, would I have hired you? And
Right.
I would, yes. People say, why? He didn't do simulation or anything like that. Yeah, but he was enthusiastic, and he looked like he was like, hey, let's go do it. Let's go do it. Let's go do this. Because there's this tenacity that I grew up with that basically, and I've said this before about my father who went through the Depression, you would think that he would be licking his wounds. He was like, I'm not going back. We're going forward.
Yes.
And I was like, I'm going forward. And when everybody says, oh, well, what are we going to do? It's like, oh, I don't know. We'll figure it out. Let's just do it. And you were one of those guys, so I would have hired you. So there you go.
Well, there's a story that I don't know if you remember, and I'm going to say it on the microphone here.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
There was a period at which I looked at you and I saw what you were doing in the organization, and this is a year or two before I decide I want to be Ed Catmull and I want to be Ben Rich. It was, I want to be Jim Weber.
Oh, no.
And I came to you in your office and I said, Jim, I don't care what salary grade it is. I don't care what we work on. I just want to be your mentee. Can my job be whatever Jim Weber needs done? Can I be your intern, basically?
I think I remember this now.
And you said, oh, Justin, you're such a humble guy. Like, oh, Justin, no, you don't want that. You don't want that. And I kind of went away dejected. I was like, no, Jim, that's literally exactly what I want.
I'm not sure how I responded or what I responded with, but I imagine that there was some entanglements within the organization.
Certainly. Yeah, no, there was political layers in every direction.
Layers that you would have had to this,
Totally.
and I had to do this. And though, as you know, I worked the system, there still was a process or procedure they had to go through.
And I don't bring up the story in any way, shape, or form to say you missed on something, but it was to say that for me was the forming events of my career of looking and saying, who do I want to be when I grow up? Separate topic, but when people come to me and they say, man, I just don't feel like I fit in my organization, or I can't figure it out, I'll ask them, I'll say, who is it in your organization, independent of salary grade, independent of position, who is in your organization do you want to grow up to be like? And that becomes not the North Star, but it helps the compass point. And it might be a mid-level manager who coaches football on the weekend and has this and this. And you say, man, that's the life that I want to look like. For me, that has become the calibration that if I'm in an organization for 2 years and I have yet to meet anybody that I want to grow up to be like, that becomes the calibration. At least for me. There's other people that are more of a trailblazer and more of this. I'm not that guy. For me, it was like, okay, it's time to
do something,
to move something, because I always want to be around trees that are taller than me that I can grow to be like. And honestly, that's interesting. That conversation with you was the beginnings of like, I think in this organization of 1,000, Jim Weber's the one that I want to grow up to be like.
Well, now I'm blushing. Excuse me a second here while I blush all over there. Interesting. I didn't have heroes. I had characteristics. Because every time you get a hero, then you find out that there's some serious flaws. You're going like, well, I don't know that. But you could take pieces from each one of them. I've iterated to you and others that my boss had never said anything bad about anybody in his life. I find that remarkable.
Right.
And I said, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
And then Larry had some of his abilities that I was like, I want to be like that. And as I went through the whole list of these things, I felt that was probably a better way of approaching it. I need to ask you another question. Were you the psychiatrist for the people?
Oftentimes. Yeah. In the past, you've talked about being the organizational psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I love caring for people and helping people. I know that as we come into a conversation, the odds of me having the silver bullet that totally solves your problem is not going to happen. But I cared, and the number of conversations I've had with people that it's like, Justin, my marriage is a wreck right now.
Oh, those are the worst, by the way.
And by having the freedom and having the autonomy that we did, I was allowed to say, hey, your marriage is more important to me than the product you produce in the next year. And so I demand you pull back. Yeah. You are not allowed. And no, I can do it. Nope. Stop. You're so valuable to me. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We are not sprinting to the next quarterly goal. We are not even sprinting to getting your product to market. If I get your product to market and lose you, I don't have you for the next project and the next project and the next project. It is to say, I've had to land in a place. I never go in with this like, just tell me your problem and I can solve it. It's a much more of, I want you to know that I care for you more than the metric. I care for you more than the success of this project. I need you to be whole and healthy. And that's a vague definition, and we could, yada, yada, yada. For me, that was a big part of not having an office. I was walking through the office all the time, and it would be somebody in the structure that we really did not talk about. It would be a brand new engineer inside of an organization of 200, and they said, Justin, you got a minute? And inside, you're like, okay, I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know what we're on, but yes, I'm for you. And so, yes, the short answer is that I did absolutely end up being an ear to hear people's issues.
So this makes it easier for me, because I was going to ask you, did you regard empathy as an important part of your...
Number one.
And the reason why I wasn't sure we wanted to bring that up, because I did too.
Yeah.
And the point is that because of whatever's happened in your own life, you somehow identify with the challenges, not necessarily the actual specific challenges. I don't mean this to be confessional, but one of the reasons why I am who I am is I had migraines. And they could be very severe.
Yeah.
And there was some anxiety attacks that came after that. And I found that the large company didn't care. You've been there.
That's where the name grody and unprofessional comes from.
Yeah. And so they didn't care that I had these problems. And they weren't as severe as many people, but they were troublesome. And so what you create is that guy or that girl, lady, or whatever, that person over there has some issues. Don't know what they are. I guess you said family or whatever it is, fears, whatever it is. You immediately connect into that because you had your own. You have your own issues. I found empathy to be an extremely important part of how you could get through these things. And then, of course, you become, as soon as they find out that you're like this, you have a line outside your door. Because a bad analogy, but is that people like yourself, you get stuck in a traffic jam.
Sure.
I mean, and some of these people just get stuck in traffic jams.
Yeah.
I got stuck in a traffic jam. You get stuck in it. Depending on what their latest view in life is at the upper levels, or you go like, wow, I'm not going anywhere. But then you have to ask yourself, where is anywhere? I'm back to your point. Yeah. Where is anywhere? What do you want to be?
Yeah.
And once you define who you are, man, life gets a lot easier.
It does. It does, definitely. The point I would make, and I think you would agree, empathy is not passivity.
Oh, no.
Empathy is trying to understand the world from their perspective and the situation from their perspective. And the hardest part I wrestled with in leadership is, at what point do we need to take action, whether it be corrective action or relocation action or a career change, because we've tried this situation multiple times and it's proving over time not to work. This isn't about being a leader, and this isn't necessarily the conversation, but it is to say, I do believe that there are some people where the most empathetic thing to do was to give them a severance and get them into the free market so that they could find an organization that was a much better fit. And I would tell you, there's a couple people in mind that I have heard through the grapevine that they love their career and they love the role they're in, which is not the company that I was at. And as the leader, I look and I say, I'm not the hero of that situation. That's not what I'm trying to make, but I'm also not the villain of that situation. No. It moved forward in a way that was difficult. It was hard. It was emotional. It was stressful, but the tension has been removed out of the system, both from the organizational perspective as well as from the individual perspective.
Amen. There's so many of these people. I kind of referred to it before as don't want to grow into be the bitter old engineer.
Yes.
And people were like, wow, you got an engineering degree, you're paid well, you get to go home at 4:30, whatever. Your bosses don't really yell at you anymore. They used to, but anymore, and they're like that. And why aren't you happy? And it all goes back to your grade school. It actually goes back to kindergarten. When you drew that picture better than that girl next to you, and the teacher smiled at you.
Right.
And the race was on from there. And then there was the culling process. You went to high school, well, you're in the top 10. You get gold ropes. And then you go off to a university, and you finally hammer your way down to coming out, and you've gotten A's, and you're looking really good, or you go to graduate school, and now you're going out to get hired by this company, and now you want to be the what? CEO. And suddenly the guy across from you looks just like you.
And you get to hear at the end of every year, meets expectations is a good thing.
Yeah.
Everybody gets a C in this school.
That's right. What? I've always gotten A's. I drew that picture better than Cynthia. I'm telling you, I can draw my pictures. And so now you're in a traffic jam. Correct. Now, we can dole out the credits here. The fact that you took action shows me that I was right, that, I'd hire this guy. He basically got himself in a traffic jam. I've already said I've been in and out of so many traffic jams, but they had resources that I needed, and so it worked out. It wasn't simple, but it worked out.
And I would say, this is sincere, the thing that I most admire about your career and your innovative spirit is that you had the patience and the intelligence and the wisdom to get out of those traffic jams. Cool. At some level, and this is full candor, at some level, I feel like I took the easy path out, which was like evacuation complete, and just
you should hit the parachute anyway to get into. We did have some people, to your point, that needed to be helped to move on. Mm-hmm. It was pretty clear that there should be a severance. It should happen. And the turmoil that surrounds that is pretty intense. And I was a person who, for whatever reason, I believed that I could just about fix anybody. And so you can imagine they sent them to me.
You collected them.
I did. And I was wrong. I could not save everybody. And the ones I didn't save still haunt me to this day. Yeah. But to your point, they needed to move on. There was so much barriers, damage, whatever you want to call it, baggage that they brought from somewhere else. Yeah. And as far as accommodating, a company could not have been more accommodating. Mm-hmm. Could not have been more accommodating. And eventually it happened, but it was a painful trek for me and for them. But the good news is I should really look at the ones that we were able to tap, shall we say, and move on. Right. And many of them moved on. They didn't fit in this gaseous state which is a great term by this gaseous state. But at the same time, finding within this individual who obviously had passed many gates to get to where they're at, you're going like, well, you're very good at this. We need to get you there. Yeah. And we got him there, and life went on, and everybody was happy. Maybe. I don't know. At least I didn't know they were the bitter old engineer by then. So
early in my career, as I was studying and starting to read about different leadership styles, we talked about there's some books you read, and you're like, oh, my goodness, I never want to be like that. And there's other books that you're like, this is who I want to be. So I did what everybody is supposed to do. You read about Jack Welch. The great Jack Welch. Neutron.
Take that grade off of there, man.
Neutron Jack. I've read 2 Jack Welch books. I don't remember the names of them. And I remember distinctly through every one of those books thinking, oh my goodness, I couldn't last 2 seconds in this organization. And obviously history has now proven that he was Neutron Jack. There was no living organism left inside of the culture of General Electric, and it just essentially has capsized and had to split. There is one sentence in both of those books that I looked at and I said, that's real though. There's one piece of advice that Jack Welch gave that I have actually utilized and seen to be accurate. And he says, people want to be good at their job. There may be rare exception, but people inherently want to be good at their job. And though it may be subconscious, they know whether or not they're good at their job. They may be denying it in public. They may be even denying it to themselves, but there is a layer at which they know they're not good at their job. It can be the most gracious thing to do is to release them from their job. It can be that they need that reset. They're not going to go looking actively for another job because I'm at GE. I got great benefits. I got this. But I'm just being eaten out by this stress of not being good at my job. And he said, it can be gracious to punt them from the organization. Now this is the Jack Welch part. Punt them from the organization.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack.
And it gives them two opportunities. This is 15 years ago, so I don't know what I've added to this construct. I've probably added this next part. There's two opportunities that person is given by being kicked out of the organization. One is they can go find an organization that they're compatible with. Two, they can do the hard work of assessing, who do I want to be and do I need to change? And neither one of those is wrong. But when you've given it, and I'll say 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half of adjusting the organism and adjusting the temperature and adjusting the pressure, and you just can't get the kink out of the system. To quote Jack Welch, this is the only time I will ever quote Jack Welch in the positive, it can be a gracious thing to get them to their next job. I always felt that you do that with gracious severance. You do that in a way that you're equipping and enabling them to get to the next place. But it is to say, the hardest part of the thermostat was finding the people that thrived in that pressure and temperature and the people that were getting just crushed or stressed or anxious about the pressure and temperature, because it was a different pressure and temperature than college, then
grade school,
and
drawing
then
that picture
all the way through. It was a different temperature and pressure, and it's not everyone is built for it. That's not said derogatorily. That's me trying to put a puzzle together.
Yeah.
Just because a piece doesn't fit doesn't mean it's an evil piece.
No.
It fits somewhere else in the puzzle.
That's right.
It just doesn't fit in this part.
I feel that when they put you in a position of management, you have an obligation to make things work.
Yes.
And that they spent a lot of time hiring this guy. And a lot of these people have been there for quite a while, maybe get into the traffic jam or whatever it is. They have an investment in the community. They have investment. Now, once you get past some of that, you recognize that maybe their personalities are a little challenging, but you know, when they drop all that, you start to realize that they have their problems too and stuff, and you sit there and instead of judgment, you're trying to figure out, all right, what could we do? And then to Jack Welch's point, if he figures out that this isn't working, there's nothing more I can do. Right. But I do have to try that. A lot of people just go, well, yeah, let me just get rid of that guy.
Yeah.
I never did that.
I'm going to make up a number, but I think it's close. I think I had about 50% accuracy of a person that it wasn't working. There was stress either in the organization or in them, and they just really didn't feel like it was a fit. So we intentionally say, just like you, let's try this part of the organization. Let's try this type of role. Let's try this leader. And about 50% of the time, a year later, we're talking about, we really need to get this person a raise because they are killing it in the new environment. About 50% of the time, either the same problem popped up despite an environmental change or a new problem popped up. And I would change my leadership style in the conversations. They would come and they would have either the same complaint they've had for 6 years, or they would have a new complaint that's a derivative. And I would actually start to introduce like, hey, I want to help you get to where it's going to work.
Wherever you want to be.
And it might not be here. And you need a recommendation, you need a letter, you need a connection. My goal is for you to be in a place that you can thrive and you can be the best version of you. We've run 2 or 3 experiments in this environment and it's not working. As testimony of you coming and telling me that it's not working. I want you to understand, just as I said before, I'm for you before I'm for the metrics. And being for you in this case might be being for you leaving. And there are multiple people where that reversal, that's a leadership reversal.
Yeah.
To them, it makes it like normative that I can actually talk to you as my boss, that I don't want to be here anymore. And I've actually said, I'm not going to punt you into the street, but let's start the process of moving you to another organization. And the person is like, oh, you'll do that? I didn't know that was something you could do. Absolutely. And so I would say it's about 50-50. The reason I brought it up is there are leaders that just say, oh, there's an issue, punt.
Yeah.
No, there's 50% of the time, my experience, that person can turn into a thriving and growing person in the organization if you just change the temperature just a little bit.
Hey, that's a good analogy.
Just change the pressure.
Back to the
just
gaseous
a little
state.
bit. Exactly. 100%.
agree. I think 50% seemed low for me.
Well, I'm not Jim Weber. Let's understand.
That's not what I was going to get at.
Of course not.
Was that it just seemed like we had some really good people there. They'd been through a gauntlet of and stuff. You're already looking at the person going like, okay, these people are really good at what they've done in the past. How'd they get here? And there was a couple that probably to this day I'm still sweating over that one. But anyway, yeah, very good.
Jim, it's so awesome to get to spend time and talk about all aspects of leadership and innovation and creativity. And you're exactly right. Not all of the answers are clear.
No.
Not all of the answers are obvious. And even in hindsight, you're like, not sure that was the best way to do that.
Oops.
But we tried. So anyway, thanks so much for coming by.
No, thank you for talking to me. I wasn't doing anything this afternoon anyway.
Awesome. We'll talk to you later.
Bye now.
For those that wish to share praise, feedback, accolades, or large sums of money, you can reach me at justin@grody.io. For those with complaints, concerns, frustrations, or accusations, or if you would like to defend the honor and management techniques of Mr. Welch, I would ask you to first consider the great words of Charlie Chaplin in the cinematic masterpiece The Kid. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.